So today we're going to launch our Invest for Change campaign. That's run by SOS UK and funded by Friends Provident Foundation. In this webinar, we'll talk about what Invest for Change is, why we need to reform university investments, and how students can bring campaigns onto their campuses. We're thrilled to be joined by 4 great speakers to do this. And I'll just give you a quick overview of what Invest for Change is, and then we'll pass over to Larissa. So Invest for Change aims to radically reform how universities invest their money, to do it in the interest of students, not against them, emphasising climate justice in that. We're calling on universities to invest in social and environmental solutions, engage with investments to influence wider corporate change, and to adopt radical responsible investment policies. And we'll do this by working with students on campuses to bring campaigns calling on their universities to do this, and also by working directly with universities that are committed to responsible investment and to change their practices to centre environmental and social justice solutions. So we're going to start off straight away going over to Larissa. Larissa is the National President of NUS, the National Union of Students, which represents over 7 million students. And Larissa is going to start us off by talking about why we need action to reform university investments and why the student movement have the power to make that happen.
Thank you so much for having me. I wish we were in a different setting and maybe we'd be in, able to chat across a weirdly lit lecture hall or something, I don't know. But it's really nice to be with you this afternoon. I really do want to talk about, the things that the student movement has been calling for so long, the role of universities in getting us there, and how we can really, really change the conversation around climate justice. Because for so long, the student movement has been pushing for climate justice. We've seen students call for a Green New Deal in colleges and universities, for divestment from fossil fuels, for ethical reinvestment, local offsetting solutions, so much that students have been asking for so long. We're moving towards these things. We're seeing students call for HE and FE sectors to become carbon neutral. We're seeing for more sustainable practices, and so much more. And when students are asking for these things, we're not just asking for them for us. We're looking around the world, we're seeing the realities that students across the globe are navigating. Students, particularly in the global south, are hardest hit by this right now. And, I think it's important to talk about the fact that the climate crisis is a racist crisis. And our student siblings, when we talk about internationalism within the student movement, our movement was built on a history of internationalism. And we're seeing that reality for students in Bangladesh suffering with the floods, for students all across the global south who are directly impacted by this in the here and now. And we're also fighting for the students of the future here. And knowing that there are so many interconnected struggles around the climate crisis that require ethical investment, that require us to radically transform the way that we see universities. And for a minute, I just want to dwell on the fact that, that there's been a resurgence, a liveliness to the conversations, both around climate justice and decolonization. And I think when people think about decolonization, they often think about this in terms of the curriculum or the people or those kind of things. But we also need to start having a conversation about universities as having a direct impact on people of colour around the world. Universities and the kind of infrastructure that they make, and the money that they move, and all of the things that connect them to the communities in the world and the society around us, and the power that has, is something that should be rooted in students and what we are calling for and what we are demanding of those spaces. So I think it's actually a really exciting conversation to be talking about ethical investment, to be talking about where we're going next, because for so long we've demanded we've demanded divestment. We've said this is what we don't want you to do. But now we're saying this is what we do want you to do, and that's where further power lies in talking about where we move next. But this can't be like in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. No, this crisis is urgent. This is about reframing the conversation around climate to recognize in the here and now, unless we act urgently, we are not going to be creating the future, the here and now, the lived experiences, the safety of the planet, the things that people deserve. And unless we have people moving, people who have the power to make that change. Like I think so often things like climate crisis, decolonization, all of these things, all of these words feel so far removed from us as individuals. But what we've seen with the divestment movement is students on the ground at the grassroots recognizing their power in collectively coming together and saying, actually, we can make change, we can push forward, and we can deliver justice for the planet. And what we're saying now is all of us, not just students, but staff within universities, these as institutions, the people who are working in and around universities. Universities are so inherently interconnected to their communities, and all of us can come together and say, actually, we are deciding, we are actively making the steps to ensure that this investment is going to change the game when it comes to the climate crisis. And that's really, really powerful. So I just want people, if there's one thing that people take away from this today, I want people to recognize that they do have power in changing this conversation. This isn't something that sits outside the window with somebody else, is someone else's responsibility. Climate justice is all of our responsibility. As I say, it's an anti-racist responsibility, but climate crisis is also a gendered crisis. Climate crisis and climate justice is fundamentally about liberation and about making sure that we all have the safety and security that we deserve. And, you know, when students are saying they want things to be done, they want things to be actioned urgently, this is not just about, you know, us wanting to scream and shout, because of course we love the demos, we love to get busy, to get out on the streets, well, before Corona. We love to do that. But we do that with purpose. We do that with vision for what power our universities have. We can see these institutions are left, right, and centre making waves across the world. Isn't it you lots that always tell us that, you know, we're international this, we're international that, we're that, and we see that. We know that universities are incredibly powerful. We know that universities can really move the lever when it comes to instances of injustice, when it comes to instances of inequality, when it comes to instances of climate crisis. So we are asking, we are demanding, we are calling for universities to do better, because we need you to do better, not just for us, not just for the students all around the world, but for literally everyone. And when it comes down to it, this sector, the power of this sector is so untapped in recognizing just how powerful we are, even beyond investment. You know, we're seeing student action groups on the ground completely changing the conversation. We're seeing students who, you know, might have come to uni or turned up to their college with very little information about what their role in the climate crisis was, feeling completely empowered to really shake things up. So think about if every single university was committed to ethical investment. Think about if every single university was making that change and the ripple impact that would have on our communities, on the students, on the world. Like, this is the vision that we're seeking. We're not dreaming of, like, I don't know about you lots, but I don't lay in my bed at night dreaming of, you know, the divestment or like, do you know what I mean? Like, what we're dreaming of is a world where everybody lives safely, lives comfortably, doesn't have to worry that, you know, the air pollution in their area is so bad that, you know, they might not be able to, that people are struggling to breathe. That they don't have to worry that, you know, the floods are getting so bad that it's going to impact their lives and their livelihoods. We don't have to worry that those things are going to directly impact their lived realities. And I think sometimes it can be easy to feel far removed from the climate crisis. I mean, particularly at a time when we're all cooped up inside. But for some people, that is the lived reality. And even for some people here in the UK, that is the lived reality. But even if it weren't, our commitment to climate justice has to extend beyond what we can see. It has to live, it has to exist in solidarity with people who have that reality today. Because otherwise, we're acting outside of the interests of our collective planet, our collective existence. Like, this is, I think, okay, I already said if there's one thing I want you to take away, but if there's another thing I want you to take away, it's that the fight for climate justice is the fight for solidarity. When we're talking about it being anti-racist, when we're talking about it being a feminist fight, when we're talking about needing to incorporate the actual experiences of people all around the world, it's because we need to come from a foundation of solidarity, and to build upon that, to build a movement for climate justice that truly reflects those most impacted and those most at risk if we don't act urgently. So I urge you, for the students watching, know your power. Don't let anyone make you feel like you cannot change the game, because you truly, truly can. And, you know, we've seen the student-powered movements, that youth-powered movements, particularly at the grassroots, have mobilized to completely revolutionize where we are on climate justice. And there's so much more to come on that. For any universities or staff or things in the room, just know that students are looking to you to be our allies in this movement. Like, we need you to act now. Like, you hold the levers. We, you know, our power is strong, but you in so many ways hold the levers. And, you know, it'd be nice to not have to get out on the ground every single time, you know. Sometimes maybe just little concession here, little concession there. Thank you very much. And for anyone else who might be watching, if you have the power to listen to students, do it. I promise you, you'll save yourself a lot of time. Because if we look historically at where society has gone, it's always lagged behind where students told you were going to be. Frankly, if I look at the history of the student movement, the things that students told us we needed to do time and time again, generation after generation. You know, I was talking to someone the other day who had looked at research going back to ancient Egyptian times, and saying that, you know, young people were at the forefront of change in that generation as well. And, you know, it just feels like, why do we constantly, as young people, as students, have to remind people that we are always going to be at the forefront of change, and we are always going to be pushing in the direction we need to go? Maybe just listen this time. So my advice to anyone who's not a student is listen up, come with openness. Please understand that this is about climate justice. It's about radically transforming the ways that we invest, and it's about safeguarding the here and now, as well as the future, for all of us as a global movement. And for those of you who are students, get involved, get signed up, be part of the movement, know your power, and collectively we're going to change the world. So thank you so much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Larissa. I feel very inspired after that, so I imagine everyone else does. We definitely can make some change here, so thank you. So we're going to move on to hear from Lily Thompson. Lily is the head of networks at ShareAction, a charity focused on transforming the investment system and unlocking its potential to be a positive force for good. Lily works with universities and charities, building networks of finance directors and supporting them to align their investment practices with the change they want to see in the world. And she's going to give us an overview of where universities are on responsible investment, what good looks like, and how we can get there. So over to you, Lily.
Thanks, Mel. It's great to be here, and thanks so much for that, Larissa. I'm feeling super inspired, and no easy act to follow. So what I thought I'd share with you today is actually a personal story, which is sort of accidentally also the story of responsible investment in the UK university sector, at least so far. Back in 2013, I visited Middlebury College, which is in Leafy, Vermont in the US, and it's the home of a really legendary environmentalist and leader of 350.org, Bill McKibben. But it's also sort of the cradle of the fossil fuel divestment movement. And when I visited, students had just heard that their campaign for the university to divest, as in to remove investment from fossil fuels, had been completely rejected by the university's trustees. So I arrived that evening and we got pizza and we sat down for hours and we did scenario analysis, we did relationship mapping, we dug through LinkedIn and Facebook to find any haphazard connections we possibly could to members of that trustee board. And we discussed strategy, frankly, at a level that I rarely see in the professional NGO or policy space these days. And it was totally obvious to me at that moment that as a student, my university's endowment was the single biggest lever that I had access to try and tackle climate change, low pay, human rights abuses, all of the things I cared passionately about. I also knew absolutely nothing about finance, investment, or economics, and pretty much everybody else in the circle was working it out too. So we taught each other. We laughed and we scratched our heads and we drew maps on big bits of paper and we tried to find a way forward from what was like an absolute out and out rejection. And actually, as a sort of winding forward to today, Middlebury changed tack and divested last year. So pretty exciting transformation from where they were back then. And so from there, I came back to the UK and I went straight to my uni's Freshers' Fair and went hunting for that same sort of circle of people. And I found it in a project called Positive Investment Cambridge, which basically reignited the spark of an earlier weapons divestment campaign. And one of my co-founders' grandpa had done South African divestment at the university. So I just want to say this work has a really long history. And as Larissa was saying, it's a history of justice, it's a history around anti-racism, and it's a history around the connection between social and environmental, just like investor changes. And all around us at that point, the divestment movement was starting to form on this side of the pond. It kicked off a bit earlier in the States. It really got going in the UK about 2013. And it was spearheaded right from the start by NUS and by People and Planet, two organisations that basically set up small groups around the country supporting students to make pressure, build noise and engage with university administration. And what that movement really did was force universities and colleges to wake up to the connection between investment and climate. Later on, I served as a trustee for People and Planet, and what I really saw was that alliance between the two organisations with what is now SOS UK and the student campaigners that it supported were really fundamentally responsible for now over half of UK universities having committed to divest. Huge win, huge transformation of the system, and that really came from student power. But back to Cambridge and my little circle of co-conspirators, we quickly realised that while pushing for divestment is a huge task, it isn't enough. Divestment is a global movement, it's clear, it's very simple, it's a great campaign ask, and it tries to do a huge and really important thing, which is basically to remove the social license of companies to operate by having big and influential organisations like universities take their investment away. And the vision for change of the divestment movement is that after people stop thinking that that company should be allowed to continue as it currently does, government regulates to protect the environment, perhaps with a tax on carbon or something like that. And back then, we frankly weren't convinced that our government in the UK was moving fast enough, that the EU was moving fast enough, and that the global process through the COP was fast enough or meaningful enough either. And we also really weren't happy with the idea that following a divestment, investors and big business would be let off the hook. And really, I guess we asked ourselves, would you put your money on government saving the planet or big business or investors? And we sort of thought to all of those and decided actually you've got to push all three. You've got to engage with government, you've got to engage with big business, you've got to engage with the investment community. And we knew that the most powerful way to do that was through our university's investments. As I say, that's the biggest lever that as a student you can grip onto to try and address the climate crisis and a whole load of other topics as well. And to pull that lever, we realized that we needed two things. One was working with the university on their decisions about which investments they should hold. Some of that's divestment, but a lot of that is their decisions about how they allocate the investments that they have, the assets that they have. And the other big thing is around engaging with the companies once the university owns them. So those companies have to change too. We can't sell out of capitalism. We've got to own something, and that something has to change if we're going to live in a livable world in the future. And that really went far beyond oil and gas companies, but it also, perhaps a bit unusually, went quite a long way beyond the sort of public petitions and mass protests that have made the history of the divestment movement, though we did our sort of fair share of that too. And really, when I look back, our secret was coffee, which is a very student thing, but it really was the secret for us. We invited members of the senior administration, the finance team, anybody involved in the process of making decisions about this for a coffee. We built personal relationships. We recognized that they are human beings, and we found the commonalities that we had with them. And that might sound really obvious, but it's amazing how rarely that actually happens. And the bottom line for us was that we had to create trust, and we had to create a meaningful conversation with these people. And in doing so, basically what we did was invite the university administration into our circle. And I just wanted to say, given that the world as it is right now means it's pretty hard to invite people for coffee, a lot of what we did was online. A lot of it was like really old school phone calls, emails, but also, you know, Zoom or Skype as it was then, or, you know, whatever else you want to use. And that works too. It's harder and it's different, but equally we've got so much better tools now than we had at that point. And what we realized out of those conversations was, while we had some of the answers, we didn't have all of them. And to get further on this journey, we had to have a dialogue with the Central University to drive things forward. And we realized that while divesting is a great goal, it's quite a short process. Whereas learning to invest in a way that aligns with the needs of people, justice, and the planet is a journey that even the most committed are still on. And you'll hear from Colin Baines shortly. He's absolutely one of the most committed in the UK and very much still on that journey. It takes a long, long time, and the world is evolving too. There are some easy answers, don't get me wrong, but the best ones take time and communication. So as students, we learned that balance of good cop and bad cop. And another thing we learned was that more expertise was needed than what we had ourselves. The sector was just changing too fast for us to keep track of and for us to have all the knowledge ourselves. So we went to NGOs, we brought in professionals, we brought in academics as well. And as students, we kept control of the dialogue. We made sure that our demands were supported, but we brought in other types of credibility to back us up. So it wasn't just our voices, we were bringing in other expertise too. You don't have to know much. Your credibility as a student really is that you're a stakeholder and you're a voice of the future. And we held on to that, but we knew that actually extra knowledge from externals who, you know, spend their day jobs doing this was also needed. And then the other thing we learned from those coffees was that university administration and finance teams are a really varied bunch. Some of them are your allies, some of them are opposed to you. Most of them are interested in this, but frankly exhausted. They've got loads of other challenges, and frankly even more these days. You all know far better than me that the sector's going through a really difficult time at the moment. And they're often daunted by such a huge topic that requires engagement with ethics, which just isn't in their job descriptions. So we learned who we were working with. We got out the big bits of paper, we got out the Post-its, we mapped who they were, we mapped what they thought, and we learned to work with them instead of against them, but also to drive them to try and change. And many of them were willing to speak with us, keen to improve and really looking for opportunities to invest in. And out of that, our campaign took the same sort of radical but pragmatic approach that Invest for Change does. Really looking for opportunities to change investment within the higher education sector that are impactful, that are proven, and that are powerful. They can really grow to scale and change the system that we're in. And through the course of the campaign while I was involved, we got millions of pounds of buildings retrofitted on campus and beyond using university and college investments. We plotted a solar energy farm that's now under construction just outside of town. We started a conversation about climate justice and diversity and what that meant for the investment portfolio, which is really blossoming right now. We engaged with the university about issuing green bonds so that they could improve their infrastructure in a radically different way using the power of their investments, and loads more as well. We were students, but most of us knew nothing about finance before getting involved. And we didn't have Invest for Change's resources to help us do it either. But all of that was totally possible for us. And I just really want to back up what Larissa was saying about how achievable this all is if you do go out and have those conversations and try and build that change. The other thing we did was work to make sure that whichever students came after us, they had ways to make their voices heard and to have a productive dialogue with the university. And we knew that that was a long journey, and really the process is as important as the outputs at a given point. So we did a lot of work on trying to improve transparency, to develop working groups, to create lines of communication. So whoever came after us, they could still engage with the university in new ways. So just before I close, I want to speak a little bit to where we are now. And after a few years of working in other places, I found myself at ShareAction, which is a responsible investment charity. And I realized that just like myself as a student, finance directors need a circle, and they need a community. So I built a project called the Responsible Investment Network for Universities, which is really about trying to create the same sort of peer support and technical expertise that Invest for Change is giving to students. And that project's learning a huge amount from the charity space, and Colin may well tell you more about that world later. But in the network, the thing I really want to say is that the finance directors in the network tell each other regularly that their motivation, and that's both the carrot and the stick, for doing this work on responsible investing is student and staff interest and pressure. It's your voices, it's your engagement, it's your questions. And the other thing that's changed more recently is that the responsible investment sector, what's often called ESG, environmental, social, and governance, has exploded. So it's grown hugely in size. The number of funds and the different opportunities have just grown exponentially. And it's really, really hard to know what's genuinely impactful anymore. And actually, what I increasingly think is students are often the best at figuring that out, because you're not spooked by financial gobbledygook. You're willing to wade through loads of research. You have those skills from your studies anyway. And you've got your eye on the prize, which is what the real world impact of that investment is meant to have. You're not going to get sidetracked from that, and you're going to find out if it's actually working or not. So often that's missing, and you need to challenge universities to up their game and to challenge their own experts. So to me, the winning formula for this whole sector is giving financial directors a community and some external expertise, but most critically, student campaigning and engagement. And just to bring us up to literally last week, Cambridge divested. It's the biggest endowment in Europe, took over 7 years of campaigning. And for me, a circle closed. It's sort of the end of one chapter for me, I suppose. But the work continues, and that's both through Invest for Change, but also students all over the country through the campaign working to stop other flows of finance to fossil fuel companies, fossil fuel projects and pipelines, engaging with companies to reduce demand for fossil fuels, stopping injustice to communities in the global south, stopping the destruction of nature, investing in local communities, retrofitting buildings, developing renewable infrastructure, really, bottom line, achieving climate justice. So what's needed? Engagement from students, but also trust and commitment to a journey between students and staff for climate justice. And I do think that's what Invest for Change is trying to do. So I'm really excited to be part of it, and really looking forward to seeing where the campaign goes. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Lily. It was great to hear kind of the whole journey for you, and a bit about what we can be practically doing and how we can be engaging with universities to make change here. So thank you. I'm going to go straight on to Colin Baines. Colin is the Investment Engagement Manager at Friends Provident Foundation. He's responsible for integrating the foundation's endowment with its mission, including using it as a tool to bring about change. And Colin is going to talk to us about why we need campaigns like Invest for Change, what they could achieve, and what's going on in the kind of wider responsible investment sector that we can learn from. So I'll pass over to you, Colin.
Cheers. Yeah, like Mel said, I'm responsible for integrating the foundation's endowment with our charitable objective, and that is a fair and sustainable economic system. So obviously how finance operates is a pretty key component to that. And my role is essentially to do with our endowment what Invest for Change is going to be asking universities to do. So it's hopefully we've proven what is doable. And I can't think of any reason why universities can't do what I'm about to basically say, what we've done. So I revamped and strengthened our responsible investment policies. And those policies, responsible investment policies, set out where we will not invest. So excluding fossil fuels is an obvious one, but on the climate change side, we also exclude the unsustainable harvest of natural resources, so unsustainable deforestation. We instruct our fund managers also to avoid intensive farming methods that degrade the environment. So unsustainable palm oil, unsustainable soy, unsustainable cattle that are all leading to deforestation. So that we have very clear policies on where we will exclude our investment. Then we have policies that cover where we will favour investment. So things like renewable energy or, other circular economy, all these sorts of issues that contribute to the solutions. And then areas where we will use our influence as a shareholder. And I think this is perhaps a really key area for building upon divestment. And there is actually quite a lot of power there. So areas where we will use our influence as a shareholder, that's around bringing about corporate behaviour change. So we're engaging with companies that we invest in, either directly or through external fund managers, to do things like adopt just transition and zero carbon transition plans aligned with the climate science. So where we will invest, where we won't invest, where we'll use our influence, but then also these responsible investment policies cover what minimum standards of behaviour we expect from those external fund managers. So for example, we expect them to vote for all climate change related shareholder resolutions. Now, if everybody did that, that would change everything. Seriously, it would change an awful lot. Right now, though, it's down to mission-led investors like ourselves to table those resolutions, and we're quite lucky if we get into the teens in terms of percentage of support. If we could normalise that you vote for these resolutions just as part of being a decent, not even going as far as being ethical, just being a responsible investor, you would vote for this stuff. And particularly university endowments. I mean, the whole point of this campaign is for them to operate in your long-term interests rather than against them. Well, right now, you'll probably find that the vast majority vote against climate resolutions, directly undermining your future. So just doing that one small thing has got enormous potential to change the whole system, really, because they're the ultimate owners as shareholders, and they have that power. So our policies cover those sorts of expectations. We expect you to vote for every climate change resolution. in the odd circumstance where you feel that's not appropriate, you give us a good explanation why. You disclose that publicly. We also expect them to have behaviours like engagement escalation policies. So say they're engaging companies to adopt robust low carbon transition plans, but they're totally ignored, or the response is tokenistic. We expect them to ramp up how forceful they're going to be in that engagement then. So we would be expecting to see behaviour like voting against the re-election of the board of directors, voting down their remuneration packages, and ultimately, if they're still getting nowhere, to divest from those companies. Again, you know, you would be amazed actually at how much influence you have when you say you're not going to vote for somebody's bonus, especially in the investment world. So those sorts of implicit threats embedded in your policies. So when you start out to engage with them, it starts out, you know, very pleasant tea and biscuits, friendly engagement. But you've actually point out that if they don't respond meaningfully, well, your policy says actually you're going to start voting down their bonuses, you're going to vote against their re-elections to the boards, and ultimately you're going to publicly divest. You'll probably find you'll get them to listen and take you a bit more seriously. So these are the kinds of policies that we've adopted. And then, so I developed these policies, I got our trustees to agree them, just as your university endowments can do this, exactly the same thing. And then I use those policies to review our existing fund managers and use those as the basis of tendering any new fund managers in future. So that's a great point at which to influence the fund managers and the investors, is actually when you're dangling potential business in front of them. So if your fund managers, if your endowment's got a few £1 million and you say, right, there's a few £1 million here for you, if you meet all of this criteria, you may actually find that previously, I mean, I found this all the time, previously often maybe not even looked at this stuff. But if they think we might win some business by edging our responsible investment standards a bit higher than the next one, that you might get movement out of them. And like Lily said, the whole ESG, environmental, social and governance investing space has absolutely exploded over the last couple of years, primarily driven by asset owners like charities, like universities, pensions, churches are all starting to say, we want our money to be invested in line with our beliefs and our mission and our objectives. And actually that is becoming a feasible thing to do now. So doing this, like it's hoped with the universities will, with a £15 billion of investment, that's a lot of influence, will help to drive much higher and more sustainable investment standards and help to establish these sorts of policies and these sorts of investor behaviours as expectations and norms. I mean, it wasn't so long ago that divestment from fossil fuels was seen as outlandish by these fund managers. It was a crazy thing to do. I remember campaigning with Platform, Greenpeace, ShareAction 10 plus years ago when I was working at the co-op. I used to run the co-op bank's ethical policy. And we used to do these sorts of campaigns. So we were campaigning against tar sands at the time, partnering with People and Planet. And then we were trying to influence the investors and the fund managers to divest from tar sands. And, you know, you would get them into a room, but as soon as you mentioned divestment, you could empty that room very quickly. It was just seen as outlandish, wild thing to do that no investor in the right mind would ever even contemplate. Well, now it's the norm, primarily thanks to universities and charities and, you know, the success of the divestment movement, basically, because they've insisted upon it. And because they've insisted upon it, some fund managers started to meet those requirements. And then it's just got bigger and bigger and bigger. Now it's a competitive thing between fund managers. So if we can get them to take basically divestment as the first step towards having robust, radical, responsible investment policies, maybe not use the word radical, it's another word that scares them, but robust, responsible investment policies that actually are very radical, but can be presented in a very sort of, this is a common sense thing to do, why wouldn't you do this? It's actually becoming the norm. The potential for impact is enormous. Like I said, just getting everybody to vote for climate change resolutions has the potential to fundamentally change the very purpose of companies. So as an example, we tabled a shareholder resolution at Total last year. It called for the introduction of a low carbon transition plan that was aligned with the climate science, had short-term and long-term targets. It got about 14% support. And that's because this kind of behavior hasn't become normalized yet. And they talk, sometimes engagement can be used as a reason not to be forceful in the engagement with companies and their stewardship, saying, oh yeah, we're making progress behind the scenes. Well, actually part of a robust, responsible investment policy is to drag it out from behind the scenes and to disclose to the stakeholders what it is that they're actually doing in your name. So, a robust, responsible investment policy includes minimum requirements on how it votes. It includes escalation policies. It includes, behavior change on the behalf of the fund managers. And it requires that you do this very transparently and you report to the stakeholders like universities should do to both the staff and the students where the money's invested and what they're doing actually to represent your long-term interests. So that doesn't sound radical, but the impact that it can have is extremely radical. So, building on the success of the divestment movement, you can break a trail exactly the same as you have done for divestment, but covering all these other areas of what a responsible investment policy looks like. Another part of this is impact investing and actually channeling at least a proportion of the endowment to directly investing in the solutions to the global challenges that particularly younger people face. This can be a bit trickier for universities because they'll go to the big external fund managers who don't know how to do it, who will tell them that it's not a feasible thing to do. But actually, if they can earmark 5% or 10% to do that and bring in some advice to do it, it's a perfectly feasible thing to do. When we as a charity tried to get our fund managers to do it, we got nowhere. We ended up doing it ourselves. So just to throw in, we ended up doing it ourselves. We set up a fund, an impact fund called Snowball. It is all about putting social and environmental impact and maximizing social and environmental returns on the same level as getting a reasonable financial return. So you can look that up at snowball.im. It's precisely the kind of reasonably low risk investment because they've got the expertise to do it that universities can look to do. It uses a framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. It invests in everything from renewables to social housing. It makes it a lot easier for the for the university endowment managers to be able to do some of this stuff. They can put a small amount in there. It's low risk, but it's high impact. They can also put together pots of money purely to go into a renewables fund or a social investment fund. But you'll probably find you get a little bit more resistance. That's why Snowball works quite well because it's diversified, it's low impact. As far as they're concerned, it's just another fund manager, but actually it's all about maximizing social and environmental impact. So a proportion to that, and then your mainstream funds, if you adopt really, like I said, radical, not radical responsible investment policies, you can change an awful lot. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Colin. Great to hear about what you've done at Friends Provident and kind of how that could look if we can push this campaign to get universities to start adopting those kind of practices. So thank you. So we'll just go on quickly to our last speaker, Laurie from Platform London, which is a research, arts and advocacy organisation with a focus on energy system change. Laurie works on the Divest-Invest campaign, which focuses on divesting local government pension schemes. And they're going to talk to us about what it is that we're divesting and investing for, bringing a social justice perspective to the conversation. So I'll pass over to Laurie. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. What I really like from the different things that people have mentioned since the beginning of this chat is that it really exemplified how multidisciplinary this movement actually is, and how multidisciplinary we need to be in our approach to actually making divestment happen. Some people will need to go into the research and have the technical conversations with decision makers to make it more feasible. And there's the side that Larissa was really enlivening us about, which is changing the value system that dictates what investments even are and where resources should be allocated in our society. And I think in the divestment movement, and in the divestment as a thing to campaign on, the way we see it as platform is the opportunity to uproot a very deep history and a very long history that is interconnected with the history of colonialism, and is to basically acknowledge in our specific focus on the fossil fuel industry, which is what we've historically focused on at platform, that it's an institution and it's an industry that got implemented very much alongside colonial power structures, and that the people who are still facing the impact of that industry today are in many ways the communities who were on the front line of colonialism and who find themselves on the front line of present day forms of colonial violence. And I think what is really interesting, connecting back to what Larissa was mentioning at the beginning of this call, is the potential, especially in universities, to really push the standards for what we ask and for the solidarity that we demand, when we know that universities have been very live with conversation about decolonization, and how these conversations have often focused on the symbolic side of things and curriculums and racism in universities, which is a very serious issue that we absolutely need to tackle. And the other side to that is the structural, is how resources and how British capital historically has been invested in what we call extractivism, the idea that we can use nature and we can use other communities from other places, we can use workers to basically extract profit. And it's okay to do that because some lives from certain people along race lines, along class lines, along gender lines, along geographical lines matter less than the lives of people here and the lives of people who hold privilege. And doing divestment is an opportunity to actually challenge that extractivism and to open up spaces in universities where we say we are dismantling these power relations, where we have internalized that our lives here and our ability to have like a healthy environment and to have access to resources is more important and more legitimate than what happens to someone else somewhere else. And I think this starts with actually taking as a starting point in divestment movements the frontline, who are in many ways actually the historical start of many divestment campaigns. It's people who find themselves affected by fossil fuel industry, by other forms of industry, who decide to resist and who decide to push back against what these industries are actually doing to their land, what these industries are actually doing to their communities. And there's so much room for campaigners in the global north, in the west, in universities to actually take that step to actually connect with campaigners who are active on the front line. There's group active in Nigeria, there are groups active in Mozambique, there's indigenous communities and groups who are resisting pipelines being installed in North America, in Canada. And there is potential for us to actually heal the separation that we've been forced to internalize, that actually, our lives here and our reality here is not connected to what happens in these places where a lot of British capital is directly invested in still. And maybe to give a little example on that before I wrap up, is the history of, in terms of the history of the fossil fuel industry and its connection to colonial violence. We can think about how Shell, which is a British and Dutch company, has been invested in extractivism in the Niger Delta for a very long time, and was pushed out of the Niger Delta in the 90s, thanks to activism that was being done by communities on the front line, in connection and with some solidarity with groups in the UK as well. Unfortunately, many people died on the front line of that struggle, which is still things that we try and keep commemorating within the movement, and that we need to keep commemorating in the movement, whilst also making the connection to the fact that what happened in the 90s in the Niger Delta, with the execution of the Ogoni 9, who were these activists who were fighting fossil fuel extractivism. 25 years later, which is basically the present day, Shell is basically still being funded by British banks to keep operating in other places, one of which is Mozambique, where now there is research being undergone for an extraction project that has already displaced thousands, actually hundreds, if I'm accurate, hundreds of families from their land, so that gas can be exploited. HSBC is one of the key banks that is funding that project, and there's so much potential for us to actually connect the dots on, these are the things that happened in the 90s. We're still in solidarity with what happened to communities in Nigeria, with the complicity of companies that are connected to our institutions, and that a lot of universities still invest in, a lot of local pension funds still invest in, and today banks like HSBC, the banks on our doorsteps, some pension funds actually also invest in banks like HSBC, is still connected to that violence in places like Mozambique, and in other places of frontline impact of the industry that we're talking about. And I think, this is also the conversation about reaching out to workers and consulting workers. Platform recently published a report called Offshore, which basically is a consultation of workers in the North Sea about how they're impacted by the fossil fuel industry, and what does a just transition looks like from their perspective as well. So I guess just to wrap up this conversation, what I'm bringing here is this idea of we really have the space and the power to challenge the idea that we're separate from people who are facing the impacts of the industries that we want to be divesting for. And I'm talking about the fossil fuel industry because it's what Platform is working on, but this connects to all sorts of industries. It's the nature of capitalism, extracting resources to accumulate profit for the benefit of a minority here and elsewhere. And I'm really excited for students and for everyone invested in this movement to keep opening up these spaces where we challenge these power relations together, and doing that by taking as a first step to research and consult and inform ourselves on what is the impact of these industries for the people who live it and who experience it on the front line.
Great, thanks so much, Laurie. That was great to hear about kind of what's going on at Platform and the wider divestment movement, and kind of why it's important that we're having these wider conversations and why we're doing them. So thank you to all of our speakers for those brilliant insights from kind of different perspectives. We haven't got as much time as we hoped, but I'm just going to open the floor for any questions from any of the attendees. Feel free to either write in the chat box or unmute your microphone to ask those questions. So I'll just give you a minute if anyone has anything. So if people have questions, feel free to write them in the chat box. I've just got a couple that we can just end on if we don't have any others. I wondered if we could ask, probably particularly Lily and Colin, what kind of specific examples can you give us of areas where we could be encouraging universities to invest in, which would have these kind of positive real world impacts?
My problem is I often talk about Snowball. Colin's just talked about that. Have you got any particular bits to speak to, Colin? I can jump in with anything else.
Well, Snowball is a bit of a catch-all because it's diversified and invests across the sort of SDGs. But there are funds, and there are UK funds for renewables, and there are, you know, emerging market funds, say, for education. There's all sorts of sort of bespoke funds that you could ask your universities to invest in. The thing is that you'll only get them to put so much there, and that's why you need to pay quite a bit of attention to the ESG side, the engagement side, the sort of mainstream investment fund side of things, because I would be surprised if they invested more than 10%. Perhaps they would, but not a great deal, much more than that. So yeah, it's worth bearing in mind the whole of what falls underneath the responsible investment umbrella. Because your shareholder power is very powerful.
Yeah, I agree. The only bit that I'd just add in is at ShareAction, we did a report recently called The Point of No Returns, which looks at the 75 biggest global asset managers and ranks them. And we have a sort of scoring system that's the same as the way they value bonds and their risk, which goes from E, D, triple C, double C, C, and all the way up to triple A. Nobody got a triple A, nobody even got a double A, which just gives you a sense of how much the industry is actually failing us, particularly the largest managers. I'll pop the link in the chat just so you can have a look through that. It's quite a good way just to think through which managers your university is using and how they're performing and what the gaps are. And that's sort of the other end of the spectrum from what Colin's speaking to, perhaps. So often those who are somewhat less impressive.
Great, thank you.
If universities were to put £15 billion on the table and say, raise your standards, you will get raised standards, and guarantee it.
Well, that's what we're hoping. Great, thank you. Just in the last minute, I wondered if Larissa or Laurie had any kind of quick ideas around how students can make sure that they're effectively campaigning in the kind of current context, and if you had any tips.
I can jump in. So obviously with the way the world has changed, it's become increasingly difficult to organise. I guess my message to students would be like, keep building community, keep holding space for not only the organising work, but also the fun and the joy and the things that also come out of organising, so that you can continue to build community in sustainable ways, and make sure that, you know, you're not putting too much pressure on yourself to organise in the ways that we would offline, because it is difficult. It is, you know, Zoom fatigue is real. All of those things are contributing to this becoming more difficult, but it is possible. And, you know, finding the ways that work for you in this like weird time that we find ourselves in, that make organising, campaigning, mobilising students possible. Like, is it a mega Zoom? Is it like, I don't know why I keep talking about mega Zooms this week, but is it a mega Zoom? Is it like getting everyone together for, you know, like I don't know, people have been doing like fun interactive things online just to get people engaged in the conversation. Like, think about flipping everything that you would ordinarily do on its head to make it work for this weird time, and you know, keep centering care and collective care in those conversations as well, because I think it's harder to do that in an online space, and that's often how organising communities keep themselves alive and keep themselves running. So don't forget to centre that in the work. But yeah, that's my advice.
I have a tiny little bit to add as well. I think all of these tips are great, and centering collective care always needs to be a starting point, and this time is a great reminder for that. I think inclusivity is also something that we need to keep centering, especially in the divestment movement, and inclusivity is something that is incredibly healing, I believe, and it's wondering and questioning ourselves when we go to a meeting, even online, on what in this meeting agenda is enabling people to be invested in the outcome of this conversation, in the outcome of divestment, and how do we set the tone in a way that actually enables a wide range of people to feel really excited about this conversation. And it means making the conversation about climate justice a conversation about social justice, about racial justice, about class justice, and a conversation about decolonization, which many students are interested in, a conversation about raising the standards of what education can look like, and what life on a university can look like, and of what solidarity looks like. And I think centering this allows us to have campaigning spaces and climate justice spaces that are really inclusive, and that actually reflect the people who have been at the center of these conversations for a very long time. And moving at the speed of trust is another kind of like thing that I think is really important in this time, and allowing ourselves to be grounded in why we're doing this work, and in why we want to be accountable, and to whom, and to really take the time to ask ourselves these questions in this time, and to look around in universities. Who are the voices who have been marginalized from these conversations? Who are the people who need amplifying? Who are the people we need to center in the organizing that we do? And how do we, in the very way we organize, can shift resources back into these spaces as well, and embody the kind of values that we're campaigning for outside of our own space. Yeah, that is it from my end. And thank you so much for being part of this space, everyone.
Great, thank you, Laurie. And thank you to everyone. Lily's had to rush off, but to Lily, Colin, Larissa and Laurie for speaking and giving us really great insights. We're going to wrap up here. Just to add that you can visit our website, which is investforchange.uk. And so thank you for coming along, and I hope to speak to you all soon.